Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I am Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, authors, successful entrepreneurs, spiritual teachers, exceptional people who will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to get them as soon as they are released. Welcome to Personal Development Mastery Podcast, episode 187. This episode today is a list of some of the most important books that I read in 2021. I actually had this conversation in my other podcast, Personal Development Essentials, where I discussed with Paul, my co-host. We were reviewing our most significant books of the year, and out of the books that I described in that podcast episode, I have chosen 7 of them. And so I'm going to share here my brief description of each of those 7 books as I talked about it in my other podcast. I hope you will find them valuable, that you will find some ideas, some triggers of something that you could read yourself or maybe give as a present. And one last thing to mention here, and then we're going to dive straight into the books, is that the last ones, especially number 5 and 7, are books that I really urge you to check them out. So having said that, let's begin. The next book on my list, it's actually a book that I read years ago, but I picked it up again and I'm going to mention it briefly. It's the Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I reread it because I had the opportunity and the honor actually to interview one of the book's co-authors, Mark Victor Hansen. So I wanted to, I don't know about you, Paul, if you've read it. I read it.
Yeah. Dog-eared copy.
It's full of stories. So each story is 1 or 2, maybe 3 pages. So it's stories different, written by different people, but they are so inspiring. So I thought very quickly, instead of saying anything, for those of you who haven't heard of the book, I will share one of the stories, which is like a very small page story. And I think it's relevant also with personal development and what we have been discussing about in the podcast. So the story is called We Learn by Doing. And it goes like this. Not many years ago, I began to play the cello. Most people would say that what I'm doing is learning to play the cello. But these words carry into our minds the strange idea that there exist 2 very different processes. First, learning to play the cello, and second, playing the cello. They imply that I will do the first until I have completed it, at which point I will stop the first process and begin the second. In short, I will go on learning to play until I have learned to play, and then I will begin to play. Of course, this is nonsense. There are not 2 processes, but one. We learn to do something by doing it. There is no other way. The next one on the list is Michael Singer, The Surrender Experiment, which I had heard about quite a few times in the past. It's autobiography from this guy who really at some point decided to let go of his need to control his life, and he surrendered to the divine. He was very spiritual back in the 70s and he decided to surrender to his life and live his whole life as an experiment without resisting what would happen. So if someone would give him a call and ask him, you know what, would you like to teach in that school or that university for that period, he had to do it because that he felt that this was presented to him as his life, as a child. Yes. So, and he was saying the resistance that he felt inside his head was overwhelming, but he still fought the resistance of the chatter of the mind and did what was presented, like surrendering. And the story, what he has lived, and how the pieces of the puzzle were pieced together later on after years and decades it's unbelievable. It made me realize, and it's a very inspiring book, 100%. For me, it gave me that sense of knowing that, our lives is part of something way much bigger. And if we resist it and try to control our life in the way that we think in our limited understanding that this is the right thing to do it, then we're missing out on some amazing things that might happen once you let go of the need to control everything and just surrender. So, very inspiring book, autobiography, true story, 100% recommend it. And it's very easy to read as well. You can read it in a couple of days. The next one on my list, which is a small book, a very recent book actually. It's less than 2 months old. It's called Stop Asking Questions by Andrew Warner. And the subtitle on the book is Lessons from a Veteran Podcast Host with 2,000 plus interviews. And obviously for me that book made a big sense to read it, because I do interview people on my podcast and I wanted to improve that. But this book, apart from these techniques that offers in abundance, and Paul, I can certainly recommend that to you. It's techniques like how to interrupt someone who's really rambling on without being rude, or what to ask if you have a complete mind blank. But apart from the techniques, which you might or might not be interested in that, what I got very much was how you can have a conversation by first being assertive about what it is that you want out of the conversation, and also really listening and paying attention to what the other person says. And this title, Stop Asking Questions, which is a very weird title for someone who does interviews, he was saying that, and I got that very well, that it's best to change not all, but most of your questions to statements. So rather than asking, so tell me, how did you do this? How do I do that? What happened next? Change some of them into statements. So tell me about this. Tell me about that. Only that changes very much the dynamic of the conversation. You sound much more assertive, and that the other person feels that he's being guided by you, rather than you asking things like you are a mentee or a student, which many times you can feel like that, especially if the other person. But so my conclusion with this book, of course, if you do interview people, it's very important, but I think in terms of communication and listening and being a better communicator, is a fantastic book, highly recommended. The next one is called No Excuses, The Power of Self-Discipline by Brian Tracy. And I will say straight away that the reason why I got this book, Brian Tracy has written over 80 books, believe it or not. I had no idea that he was so productive. But I had the honor really to interview him on my podcast. It's not out yet, but I wanted to, when you have half an hour with one person, I was thinking what to talk about. I don't want to scatter about. So I thought, let's talk about self-discipline, which it's something I'm very big at. So I read the book. The book is amazing. It's good old school personal development. It reminded me, how 𝗔𝗯cie explains things. It is this thing that a fantastic style, very easy, very simple to read and follow. And my biggest takeaways from this, because this is really an actionable book, it's not about theory at all. And he said about self-discipline, and so he says in this book, it's the ability to say no to ourselves. That's fantastic. And he also mentions the self-control. He also describes it as self-mastery. And another way he described it is the ability to delay your gratification. And all these things, even though they are not exactly the same, but I can get the point that all these are self-discipline and delayed gratification. And one thing I really got, again, I mean, it's something that we've talked, I think, since episode 1 or 2, that personal development is a lifelong process. So the same with self-discipline. It's not that you will gain self-discipline to a certain point and then you say, now I am self-disciplined. It's something you have to do every single day. And there was one other big thing that I got from it, from this book. He talks about a mantra that he used personally, and I've been using it as well since I read the book. When things are not going the way you want them to go, either externally or internally, it doesn't. You use the mantra, I am responsible. It really anchors me when I think of it like that, because no matter what is happening out there, you are responsible for the way that you feel. So if you're feeling like shit, I am responsible. By repeating this mantra to yourself, you gain again the power to do something about it. My next one, and this is actually, I'm going to do a small preface about this book, because this is the most important book that I certainly read this year, and probably for a few years. And it is a book that can really make a big difference, especially if you've never read anything like that before. It can completely flip your viewpoint of the world. So the book is called An End to Upside Down Living. It's by an American author called Mark Gober. Again, I had the pleasure to interview him. Actually, that's what I found about the book, because I interviewed him. I was introduced to him by someone else from my podcast, and when I started researching him, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So I'm trying to think of what is a simple way to explain something, because I kind of gave a big introduction, but he has researched and collated information about other people who research consciousness. And when I say consciousness, I mean this experience that we're living our life, that we all have. So there have been many people who have researched that, and Mark takes lots of this knowledge and presents it in a way, and the argument that he makes is, where does all this, our consciousness, come from? So this experience of life that we look around us and we speak and you communicate, where is that? And most people, science included, would say that this is all chemical reactions happening inside the brain. The thing is that this theory, because this is a theory that it comes from our brain, has never been proved. Actually, there is a list, Science Magazine has a list with the top 20 unanswered questions in science. And this is the number 2 question, where does our consciousness come from? So it has not been proved that and actually with what it says in the book, he actually proves that it's impossible for it to be coming from our brain. And he uses many examples of metaphysical phenomena that had been studied in peer-controlled, peer-reviewed studies, so very scientific studies that have proved that people have had experiences that we can't explain with the current scientific knowledge. So for me, that book, and I'm really trying to think how I could present it in the simplest way, but instead of this common way that we believe that our consciousness is produced inside our brain, so our brain does these complex chemical reactions and we experience our life, which means that when the brain switches off, we die and that's it and finished. The alternative, which sounds like a much more valid theory, is that our brain merely receives consciousness. So the analogy that he uses is like an antenna that picks up the signal. So if the television is what we see in the television is your life, it is the brain is the antenna that receives that. It's not what produces the image. The image is those radio waves or the TV waves that the antenna picks up. Another analogy he uses is like a phone connecting to the cloud and downloading information for the cloud. So our brain, as an analogy, is the equivalent of the phone connecting to the cloud, to the universe, to God, and this really the book goes into metaphysical topics, but in a very scientific way. So and I loved how you were doing earlier, Paul. You were saying that this book is for this person, and I think if someone is skeptical to anything that is not mainstream science, especially with this thing, and very skeptical with spirituality, this book will give very solid scientific evidence that there is a very different way of looking at things, and that's why he calls it upside down living, because by assuming that our brain is what manufactures our consciousness, our life, then the next deduction is that when we die, it's all over, it's finished. But
a scary prospect.
well, the scariest of all, isn't it? But then you see what spirituality and religion say, that there is afterlife and so on. Anyway, it's for me, it really gave some scientific proof that spirituality exists, it's real. It's not our brain that creates our life, our brain receives what is happening. And so my next one is by the same author I mentioned earlier, Mark Gober. It's the third book, his third book. It's called An End to Upside Down Liberty, and he talks and I will briefly mention that because I actually did a huge two-part podcast episode feature with him, because I studied this book and I had a conversation about him very recently, and I will direct people who want to find out more there. He talks about what is going on since the pandemic started last year, and what is going on, I mean in terms of our liberty, in terms of our freedoms being little by little taken away. And I think that is something that you just need to look around carefully to see that we can do less things that we could. We wait for the politicians or the government to tell us what we can and what we can't do. Can we go out for 15 minutes a day, or is it a lockdown? That is there going to be a curfew? And regardless of anything else, the book is about liberty and what and why the government is taking on liberty. He follows the history of governments, and I will make here a clarification that for me is very relevant, because I was never into politics, Paul. I don't know about you, never in my life. But the last year and a half, I'm starting to get very much into politics because it's affecting my life. My freedom, my liberty. I can't do things without some prerequisites. So that's if I voice an opinion that is not the common opinion, then I get either ridiculed or silenced, or I could even, some people have lost their jobs, so because they're saying something that is not agree with what is happening. So the book, An End to Upside Down Liberty, was a great reminder of or knowledge really for me, because I didn't know it, of what the government is, how it has come to be what it is, why we have given all our power to it. And apart from the institution of government as such, also the people, the politicians. We think that they are they want our best interest, but is that really the case? And a very thought-provoking book. For me, anyone who is concerned about what's going on and whether our children will have any freedom to live life, or they'll be walking with masks around forever and having to scan their retina like the science fiction dystopian movies. It's a great book to understand the current situation why our liberty has been taken away and what we can do about it. Because otherwise, and that's for me, it is something I have been felt very passionate about recently, that we have to do something. We are in trouble as free society. There is something we need to do, each of us. So reading a book is certainly something that is a very good first step before they start burning them. The last book, and I continue the topic I started with the previous book. So this last book for my recommendation is called The Truth About COVID-19, Exposing the Great Reset, Lockdowns, Vaccine Passports and the New Normal. It's a book by Dr. Joseph Mercola. And continuing what I was saying about our freedom, our liberty, which I'm very concerned that we're losing it little by little, ever so sadly, but whatever has been taken, we don't get back. This book, I think it's a must read for someone who is not exposed to the alternative opinions, shall we say, because I think it's quite obvious, I hope it is obvious to most people that there is one narrative, one specific way of presenting the COVID situation in the world, and anything that does not agree with that is being censored, is being muted, it's being ridiculed, it's being prosecuted. And for me that is a basic violation both of our freedoms. When it has to do with medical treatments, it's a violation of science. Because if I have a treatment that works and that treatment gets silenced or ridiculed or forbidden because it's the opposite of what the mainstream narrative is, then for me that is a great deal of concern. And unfortunately, all our media, or most of the media, the mass media anyway, plus social media, they will present a very one-sided view of COVID. And I'm trying to use words carefully to, be as objective as I can. But I think that we deserve to hear what the other side is. And then once you hear the other side, if you have reasons to believe that the other side is conspiracy theory, as they like to call it, then go right ahead. But in order for you to engage in critical thinking, you have to get acquainted with what the alternative is, what other thing is there that we're not being told by the TV. Why does Facebook put all these warnings every time someone will mention the word vaccine? Why are we not allowed to speak freely about it? So this is obviously a very big topic, and it's affecting our lives every day, and even more the lives of the future generation. So I think it's a very important topic. So this was the list with 7 of the most impactful books that I read in 2021. You will find the titles of all of them in the show notes. And I hope you find this useful. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you have, please share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to know more about what I do, visit my website 𝗵cie𝘀𝘁. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in,